case of Allison Benia. Allison Pamela Benia Vasquez was born on November 7, 2001 in Cartago, Costa Rica. She was an only child living with her mother, Yendri Vasquez. Along with her mother, her grandparents, Ramon and Marjorie, and her aunt, Samara, also played a role in raising Allison. Her father left the family shortly after her birth. He chose to start a life with another woman who was expecting. He had no interest in being part of Allison's life. Only once, after being diagnosed with lung cancer, did he ask to see Allison, and Yendri permitted it. It's worth noting that his new family was unaware of Allison's existence. Allison and her mother, Yendri, shared a very strong bond. To Allison, Yendri was not only a mother but also a father. That's why she often gave her mother presents on Father's Day. Their bond went beyond the usual mother-daughter dynamic. Allison could confide in Yendri freely without fear of being judged or misunderstood. Even without a father, Allison never felt alone or neglected. She had a big extended family and loved spending time with them. She also went to church every Sunday without fail. Family members described her as kind, sociable, and cheerful. In photos, she always seemed joyful, with no signs of sadness or emptiness in her eyes. Allison always wanted to become a model. She left 8th grade to take makeup classes, feeling it was too hard to manage both. She didn't want to waste time on something unrelated to her dreams. She then began searching for a job to support her mother financially but received no callbacks. This deeply saddened her. Her mother, Yendri, saw her daughter struggling due to her lack of schooling, so she urged Allison to enroll in evening classes. At age 18, Allison enrolled in Liceo Enrique Geyer, a few miles from home. During this time, she completed a pastry course and began practicing. Allison made delicious cakes and desserts that were loved by everyone in the neighborhood. This helped her find a way to make money from her baking talent. Allison had a boyfriend named Harold Suarez Solano, who lived in Cachi, a district in the province of Cartago, Costa Rica. Usually, Allison stayed home with her mother in the morning, then met Harold, and then went to evening school at 6 p.m. She often returned home late by bus. The route from the bus stop to her house was dangerous, dark, and deserted. Therefore, Allison always informed her mother of her location, and sometimes her mother picked her up at the bus stop or halfway. On March 4, 2020, Allison went to her mother's nail salon, then visited her classmate Paula for about 15 minutes. They arrived at school at 6 p.m. and separated because they had different classes. Allison arrived at school and waited in an empty classroom for about 15 minutes before realizing that her classes had been canceled for the day. Instead of going home right away, she decided to visit her aunt, who lived near the school. However, her aunt was not home. Allison then decided to go to her boyfriend Harold's house. When she arrived, she learned that Harold was at work but would be back soon. Harold's mother invited Allison inside to wait. When Harold returned, the family had dinner together, talking about a variety of topics and discussing future plans. After dinner, Harold excused himself for a moment, saying that he had urgent business to attend to but would be back soon. At 8:15 p.m., Allison left Harold's house without waiting for him to return. This set off a chain of events that would become nationally known. Harold returned home about 5 minutes later and, seeing that Allison had left, texted her to ask where she was and offered to give her a ride home on his bike. Allison replied immediately that she had already arrived at the bus stop. While waiting for the bus, she texted her friend Paula to ask if Paula's cousin could give her a ride home on his bike. However, Paula's cousin refused because his bike was a special type and not suitable for two people. It is unclear why Allison did not ask her boyfriend for help. She may have been angry with him or did not want to bother him. Allison got off the bus at 8:43 p.m. Her house was about a mile away. Feeling anxious and scared, she texted her mother to pick her up. At 8:45 p.m., Allison texted her boyfriend and mother that two suspicious men had gotten out of a car and were following her. She decided to run home to avoid them. The road Allison was on was dangerous, poorly lit, and had few people. There was only one security camera there, which captured a blurry image that could have been Allison. Allison's mother, Yendri, went to the bridge half a mile from their home to pick up her daughter but did not see her. She tried to stay calm, thinking that Allison might have gone back to the bus stop for safety. However, she did not find her there either. She finally thought that Allison had not seen her and had gone home on her own. When Yendri returned home, she found that Allison was not there. She immediately called relatives and friends to ask for help in the search. About 30 minutes later, Harold woke up and received a call from his Aunt Samara saying Allison was missing. He tried to contact Yendri but was unsuccessful. 3 hours later, Yendri reported Allison missing to the police, and the search began. Luckily, Yendri had the last photo of Allison in the clothes she was wearing. Police checked several locations, from the bus stop to Allison's house, Kachi Lake, and the nearby hydroelectric dam. On March 5, 2020, police found their first clue: Allison's glasses in the grass about a mile from her house. However, Allison seemed to have disappeared without a trace. 8 days later, they discovered Allison's identification on a coffee plantation. This was surprising because they had checked the area several times before. What was even more suspicious was that her ID was placed in such a conspicuous and clean location, as if someone had intentionally placed it there to mislead the investigation or hide something. 15 days after Allison went missing, Yendri received a call from Allison's father. Instead of showing concern or offering help, he said that Allison was missing because she was too beautiful. Shocked by these insensitive words, Yendri immediately hung up the phone, unable to believe what she had just heard. For a long time, the family, police, and volunteers continued to search for Allison. Every Sunday, they hung up posters with her picture. One day, they decided to paint messages on the streets, recreating Allison's journey from the intersection to the bridge, where she was believed to have disappeared. They also put up posters on roadside poles to attract the attention of passersby. At the same time, the police received an important clue. A man came to the police station and said that he knew Allison and had seen her on the night she disappeared. According to the man, at around 8:30 p.m. on March 4th, he left his home on his motorbike to pick someone up. On the way, he saw Allison and a burgundy two-door BMW parked next to her. He turned around to check on the situation and realized it was his cousin's BMW. He was 100% sure of this because the car had distinctive bright yellow headlights. Another witness also confirmed to the police that he had seen the same BMW near where Allison went missing that evening. The car belonged to Nelson Sanchez Urania, 28, nicknamed Sukia. Locals called him that because they believed he was a member of a gang in the area. In fact, Nelson and Allison knew each other. Their families had been acquainted for a long time and had lived in the same neighborhood for a while. However, according to Allison's mother, they had only interacted with Nelson a few times. It was just a normal neighborly relationship, not a close friendship. One day, Nelson offered to give Allison and her cousins a ride home. She agreed because it was morning, she was not alone, and she thought Nelson was a good person. On March 2nd, 2020, 2 days before Allison went missing, Nelson contacted her via Facebook. He sent a message asking Allison to answer some questions. On her cousin's advice, Allison agreed to answer them. Next, Nelson asked Allison about her feelings for him. Specifically, he wanted to know if Allison liked him. Allison was confused by Nelson's sudden question, as they were not close and barely knew each other. When Allison asked why, Nelson explained that he did not have a negative opinion of her but wanted to know if she thought badly of him. Allison reassured Nelson that she did not hate him and that everything was normal between them. Nelson thanked her and said goodbye. Police searched Nelson's home and seized his car, cell phone, and computer. Investigators found shocking images of women being abused on his phone. When they inspected the car, they found that it had been thoroughly cleaned with car polish. However, the front driver's seat carpet and trunk carpet had been removed. Police found hair and blood on the trunk lid and sent samples to a lab for analysis. After examining the exterior of the car, police used a police dog to search for traces. The dog detected possible blood on the 2 front seats and in the trunk. To confirm, the police used a luminol test, a chemical that reacts with hemoglobin in the blood. The results showed that there were many blood stains on the car's interior, despite the owner's efforts to remove them with cleaning products. While waiting for the results from the lab, Nelson remained free but was closely monitored by the police. They monitored his every move to prevent him from leaving the city or the country. Although Yendri repeatedly requested his arrest, the police did not have enough evidence to do so. Therefore, Nelson continued to live freely without being prosecuted for many months. Yendri believed that Allison had been kidnapped for ransom. She tried to stay calm and hoped that her daughter was still alive. In preparation for Allison's return, Yendri kept her daughter's room as it was, not cleaning or rearranging the furniture. She even bought Allison a gift. Yendri told the press, "I will continue to do so, as long as there is no evidence that she is dead. I still believe that my daughter is alive and will return home." Laboratory test results confirmed that the hair and blood found in Nelson's car belonged to Allison. The police immediately arrested Nelson. Later, his ex-girlfriend told the police that Nelson had never physically abused her, but had put a lot of mental pressure on their relationship. Specifically, he forbade her from contacting her friends and using the internet. According to her, Nelson only wanted to have a sexual relationship with her. His previous boss revealed that he was very irresponsible at work and even stole about $11,000. Additionally, his landlord said an ex-girlfriend had broken up with him because she was tired of paying his debts. She described him as a very spoiled man. After that, Nelson confessed to his crimes against Allison. He said that on the night of Allison's disappearance, he found her walking alone on a deserted road. Taking advantage of the late hour and their acquaintance, Nelson offered to give Allison a ride. She agreed and got into the car without suspicion. However, instead of taking her home, Nelson drove to a remote coffee plantation and forced Allison out of the car. Nelson finally stuffed her into the trunk of the car and drove to a dumpster in San Juan de Chichagua, Cachi. There, the killer pushed Allison off a cliff into a pile of trash below. He justified his heinous actions by saying that he was under the influence of drugs. He also admitted that he had long been obsessed with Allison, and when he saw her that night, he decided it was his chance to carry out his dark intentions. Surprisingly, Nelson later recanted his initial statement, accusing the police of coercing him into confessing. However, the authorities had enough evidence to charge him despite his denials. The suspect could face a maximum sentence of 35 years in prison. In the early morning of September 4th, a search party went to the San Juan de Chichagua landfill to look for Allison's body. However, because the area was large and difficult to access, finding Allison's remains was an extremely difficult task. Moreover, it had been 6 months since Allison went missing. Just 25 days after Nelson's confession, the police discovered a number of important pieces of evidence. They found human bone fragments, including a spine, ribs, part of the pelvis, and a femur. They also found pieces of clothing that Allison was wearing on the day she disappeared, along with a pair of sneakers with studs inside. All of these clues were sent for testing and thorough analysis by the police. Jose Francisco Herrera, the suspect's defense attorney, questioned the authenticity of the evidence because it was found by volunteers, not professional police. He also said that the discovery of the remains coincided with the time his client declared his innocence, which was suspicious. Rodrigo Araya, the attorney representing Allison's family, on the other hand, criticized the suspect's change of testimony, saying that it undermined the credibility of the official investigation. On October 5, 2020, experts confirmed that the remains found belonged to Allison. Because only a partial body was found, they were unable to determine the exact cause of death. However, examination of the remains revealed multiple fractures that appeared after death, suggesting she may have fallen from a great height. Her clothes were torn, and her sneakers had bite marks, suggesting a possible animal attack. This would explain why the remains were found scattered in different areas of the landfill. Allison's mother, Yendri, is furious with the police for not listening and acting promptly. She believes that if they had arrested Nelson sooner, he would have confessed, and Allison's body would have been found in better condition. This is an irreparable loss for the family. Despite the terrible pain she is enduring, Yendri finds some solace in saying, "My daughter is in a better place now, where no one can hurt her anymore." The trial of Nelson took place on July 19, 2021. Harold, Allison's boyfriend, was a key witness in the case. According to Harold's testimony, on the afternoon of March 4, 2020, at approximately 6:30 p.m., he returned home and found Allison there with her mother. Harold then left for approximately 5 to 10 minutes. When he returned, he discovered that Allison had left without saying anything. While Allison was on her way home, Harold texted her repeatedly. As soon as she got off the bus, Allison texted Harold to say that two men were following her. Concerned for her safety, Harold suggested that she take a taxi and promised to pay for it. However, Allison refused twice and said that she would run home. Harold did not receive any further response from Allison after that text message. According to his explanation, he only informed his mother of the situation. He did not contact Allison's mother, Yendri, because his phone battery died. He then fell asleep for about 30 minutes. It was Allison's aunt who called him to inform him that his girlfriend was missing. Since then, he said he has been worried and tried to call Allison several times, but all the calls went to voicemail. He also could not be reached via WhatsApp messages. Harold said he joined the search party for a few days, but then had to stop because he felt unwell and had to go to work. He really wished things had gone differently. If he could go back in time, he would have taken Allison home that night. However, unfortunately, what happened cannot be changed. On August 18, 2021, the court sentenced Nelson to 18 years in prison for taking the life of Allison. He could have received twice the sentence, but the judge pointed out that there was no evidence to confirm that Nelson knew the route and time Allison would return home and that he planned to attack her. Furthermore, due to the condition of Allison's remains, there was no evidence that Nelson forced her to have sex. The story does not end there. Allison's family was not satisfied with the original sentence, arguing that it was not commensurate with the crime. In 2022, they successfully appealed, and the court decided to retry the case. As a result, on September 28, 2023, Nelson was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Allison's family's lawyer emphasized that Nelson acted in a cruel and inhumane manner and took advantage of the trust of the victim and her relatives. The court ruled that Nelson's actions were intentional. Nelson used his long-standing relationship with Allison to commit the crime. The criminal court also took into account Nelson's lack of remorse for his actions. Although still hurt and angry, the victim's family was relieved by the new verdict. The decision ended a painful chapter in their lives that lasted more than 3 years and put an end to this nightmare. Allison's family created a memorial at the spot where her body was found. They placed a cross, flowers, and a small altar with a photo of Allison and a statue of the Virgin Mary. Allison's case has caused a stir in Costa Rican media and social media. It has also led to many marches in memory of Allison and other women who have been victims of similar violence. Helen Milner was born around 1964 in New Zealand to her mother, Anne Milner, and frequently spoke about how hard it was to raise Helen, who had been a difficult child from early on. By age 10, Helen was already getting into serious trouble, a pattern that would follow her throughout life, and kept a written record of Helen's offenses, many of which were quite severe. Helen went to high school in Christchurch, the largest city on New Zealand's South Island, known for its English-style heritage. Though she attended a well-regarded school, Helen stole from classmates and withdrew large amounts of money from her mother's account. Her mother chose not to press charges, and fellow students did not report her to authorities, but the school ultimately expelled her. Worried about her daughter's future, and enrolled Helen in Ritchie's Secretarial College. After finishing, Helen worked as a typist but was fired for submitting a fake letter from the Ministry of Health that falsely allowed smoking in the staff room. She later worked as a cashier at United Building Society, a New Zealand-based lender, but was dismissed for theft. Once more, her mother repaid the stolen money and spent thousands to keep her daughter out of prison and court. Nevertheless, Helen continued down a troubled road. She moved to Wellington with a fiancé, but the relationship ended badly, leaving her in debt and returning to Christchurch. Financial issues persisted. Helen often exploited her family, stealing from her disabled aunt and taking money from her father's wallet. In her early 20s, Helen met Mark Robert Kearns, They married around 1987 and had 2 sons, Greg and Adam. The marriage dissolved in the mid-1990s in a bitter divorce, followed by a tough custody dispute. Mark claimed Helen was manipulative, driven by money or self-interest, and showed no empathy. He alleged that she lied in court to get custody and told the boys their father had moved to Australia and didn't want to see them. Despite spending over $20,000 on legal fees, Mark found it hard to stay in touch with his sons until they were old enough to contact him on their own, by which time the bond was deeply damaged. Details of Helen's life after the divorce are unclear until 2005, when she married Philip Nisbet. Phil was born on March 20th, 1962. He was the eldest of 4 siblings. As the eldest, Phil was always protective and caring toward his siblings, especially his youngest sister. At some point, the Nisbets moved to Australia, but Phil chose to stay in New Zealand. He worked as a truck driver, a demanding but reasonably well-paid job. He was married to a woman named Vicky, with whom he had his eldest son, Zach. After their separation, he formed a relationship with Karen, which produced his younger son, Ben. This relationship also ended, leaving Phil single again as he entered his 40s. The specifics of how Phil and Helen met remain unclear, but it is evident that both had experienced failed marriages and had children from previous relationships. Their happiness together was well documented in family photos shared on social media, showing them smiling and evidently in love. They got married in 2005. Initially, everything seemed perfect, and their families were pleased to see them rebuilding their lives. However, not everything was flawless, and like any couple, they had their difficulties. Even Helen's family blamed her for generating conflicts, as Phil avoided confrontations. Helen and her sister-in-law, Lee Ann, had a falling out in 2006, leading to a permanent rift. There are 2 versions of the story behind their disagreement. One version suggests that Lee Ann's teenage son, Lance, had stayed with Phil and Helen, and after an incident that upset Helen, she called her sister-in-law to complain, resulting in an argument. The other version claims that Lance reported to his mother about a nefarious plan that his uncle Phil was allegedly plotting under Helen's influence to harm his ex-partner, Karen. Lee Ann confronted Phil about the absurd plan and took her son out of Phil's house. Despite this, Lee Ann continued to love her brother, but regretted the distance that grew between them. Although things seemed fine, or at least Phil thought so, Helen had grown tired of the relationship. She spoke ill of him behind his back and complained about not being free. Sometimes, she openly fantasized in front of her co-workers about becoming a widow. However, she never mentioned divorce. On April 15, 2009, Phil fainted at work and was taken to the hospital. Doctors were unsure of the cause but suspected an allergic reaction to a spider or insect bite during a recent visit to Australia for his birthday. His condition improved and he was sent home. But that night, he fell ill again. Helen informed her younger son that she would take Phil back to the hospital. In the days that followed, Adam spoke to Phil about something odd he had noticed the night Phil's condition worsened. He told Phil that his mother had been holding some empty capsules and tried to hide them from view. Despite being Helen's son, Adam warned his stepfather to be cautious, suggesting that his mother might poison him. Phil, trusting and unwilling to believe such a thing, reassured Adam that he had nothing to worry about and must have been mistaken. This incident was the final straw for Adam, who moved out the next day, unwilling to remain in a toxic environment. For about 3 weeks, life returned to normal, with everyone going about their routines without health issues. On May 3, 2009, Phil, a loving father, texted his younger son, Ben, before bed, informing him that he had washed his hoodie and would bring it to him the next day. However, Phil did not wake up that morning. On May 4, 2009, Helen called the police, reporting that her husband, Phil, was dead in their home. The police responded quickly, as it was a slow day with an available patrol. Helen, in tears, opened the door and led the officers to the master bedroom, where they found Phil's body lying diagonally on the bed, eyes open and not breathing. The officers noticed 2 empty packets of pills and a half-empty glass of water on the nightstand. Helen's crying intensified, but something about her made the officers keep their distance. They called their superiors to report the scene and notify Phil's family. With the phone in her hand, Helen reported that her husband had taken his own life and that she had evidence to prove it. The police took the phone and saw a message on the screen seemingly sent by Phil. The message expressed Phil's sorrow, stating he couldn't go on, that he loved her very much, and asked her to take care of herself and tell Ben that he loved him. The message was dated May 3rd and sent at 10:30 p.m. The lead officer on the scene was notified of everything that transpired during their investigation. Meanwhile, Phil's body was taken to the morgue in hopes that the autopsy would shed light on the situation. Leanne described the moment she received the call from her father, informing her that Phil had ended his life as terrible. Despite not speaking to her brother much over the past 2 years due to her argument with Helen, she never imagined Phil would make such a drastic decision. Days later, when the preliminary autopsy report was released, it was revealed that Phil's body contained high levels of an anti-allergic drug that paradoxically caused him a severe allergic reaction. At that moment, Leanne felt she had to accept that her brother had decided to end it all, but something in her spirit rebelled against this notion. From then on, significant events unfolded, but the police seemed fixated on the idea that Phil's death was self-inflicted, causing delays in the investigation. Then, something almost unheard of in criminal cases occurred. The perpetrator's own family accused her. On May 13th, the couple's relatives went to the police station. They expressed their suspicions that Helen had tried to kill her husband 3 weeks before the fatal outcome. However, this lead was not immediately pursued. Another notable event was that during May, Helen began exchanging text messages with an ex-boyfriend named Barry. Surprisingly, Barry moved into the home Helen and her recently deceased husband had shared just a few weeks later. By this time, Leanne had re-established contact with Helen, as Phil's death necessitated conversations and reconciliation. In one of their talks, Helen mentioned a farewell letter that Phil had left, which she found when she opened the safe. She read the letter and promised to show it to Leanne when they met in person. A little over a month after her brother's death, Leanne flew from Australia to New Zealand for 2 reasons. One was to celebrate her son's 20th birthday, and the other was to discreetly investigate Phil's death. Helen offered her a place to stay, and she accepted. The night of her arrival, Helen greeted her with a vodka glass in one hand and the supposed farewell note in the other, typed on office paper and signed with Phil scribbled at the bottom. Leanne immediately thought it didn't look like her brother's signature but remained silent, focusing on the letter's content. Phil claimed he had discovered that Ben was not his biological son and could not face him again. Additionally, Helen mentioned finding a small black book Phil supposedly kept, detailing affairs with other women and a guide on becoming a gigolo. Though angered by the negative image Helen was trying to paint of her brother, Leanne had to pretend not to arouse suspicion. She said she disapproved of Phil's decision to take his own life and would go to bed to be in good condition for the next day, when the family would gather at a restaurant to celebrate Lance's 20th birthday. That day, when Helen returned from work, she was furious, carrying the mail in her hand. Karen, Ben's mother, had written to request Ben's belongings from the house and some money Phil had left for his younger son. Filled with rage, Helen declared she would put Karen in her place, claiming Ben wasn't Phil's son and announcing that they would not be attending Lance's birthday celebration. Although Leanne disagreed with Helen's behavior, she chose to remain silent, not wanting to provoke her. She needed to stay close and observe everything she could, as she continued to suspect foul play in her brother's death. That evening, Barry, Helen's new boyfriend, dropped off the 2 women at the restaurant where they would celebrate Lance's birthday. Upon arriving, they met Zach, Phil's eldest son, who was with Vicky, his mother, and her partner. Helen was extremely courteous to them, even inviting Zach to her house the following weekend to sort through his father's belongings and take what he wanted. Leanne later remarked that she could hardly focus on Lance's celebration with everything happening before her eyes. She couldn't understand why Ben was treated so poorly while Zach was offered his father's possessions. It also struck her as odd that Ben was mentioned in Phil's last messages, but Zach was not. She suspected that Phil had not taken his own life and that Helen had written the notes to sow discord between the brothers, but she couldn't prove it. Before returning to Australia, Lee and went to the police and provided all this information. She found it suspicious that Helen was already living with her new boyfriend in the house she had shared with Phil. Following the accusations from Helen's own family and Lee's statements, the police requested Helen to provide the supposed farewell note from her husband. She submitted it on July 6, 2009, but notably, Phil's scrawled signature was missing. Meanwhile, Helen's relationship with Barry was progressing rapidly. On July 12, 2009, he gifted her a gold ring with a diamond worth over $2,000. Helen wore it proudly on her ring finger but insisted it was not an engagement ring, as Barry had not proposed when he gave it to her. Throughout 2009, Helen continued her deceitful ways. Between January and September, she had been stealing from her employer, although no one knew at the time. In 2010, amid multiple requests from Phil's family to clarify the circumstances of his death, the police summoned Helen for another statement. On January 30th, she made her second statement. By then, her depiction of an ideal marriage from her first interview had changed significantly. She told the detective that she never claimed her husband was a good man. When asked about the note explaining his decision, she stated that the police had found it in his briefcase and that the handwritten signature resembled Phil's writing. The investigator reminded her that the letter she submitted to the station had no signature. Helen quickly responded that she had kept a copy and hadn't looked at it for so long that she mistakenly believed it was signed. Helen also expressed that Phil's family had turned against her, claiming it was unfair. Known for her vengeful nature, in March 2010, she bought a mobile phone and sent herself threatening messages, pretending they were from her son, Adam. This was her way of retaliating after learning he had backed his grandmother when alerting the police about how dangerous Helen could be. She accused Adam of sending death threats to his ex-girlfriend, suggesting he had violated a restraining order, and claimed he was extremely aggressive, making her fear for her safety. Due to these serious allegations from his mother, Adam was detained for over 15 days until it was revealed that everything was a fabrication of Helen's twisted mind. Helen's luck seemed to turn in late 2010. In October, she was sentenced to 5 months of house arrest after being found guilty of stealing from her employer between January 2009. Concurrently, Lee's persistence bore fruit, leading to a forensic investigation into Phil's death starting in November 2010. Lee had requested permission to review some evidence for the court case, and it was granted. Lee brought a folder of documents with Phil's signature for comparison with the farewell letter. The judge showed her and her brother the letter. Lee practically snatched it from the judge's hand upon seeing it lacked a signature, displaying her anger and disappointment at what she saw as another of Helen's attempts to evade responsibility. The subsequent court investigation highlighted the police's failings in investigating Phil's death, Helen's history of law violations, and mounting evidence that Phil had not taken his own life but was a victim of foul play. On the stand, Helen described her husband as very nervous and easily agitated, recounting their trip to Australia in March 2009 for Phil's birthday. During that trip, he had been bitten by an insect, taken a low dose of Phenergan, and remained unconscious for at least 6 hours, discovering his severe allergy to the medication. Helen added that the day before his death, they had a pleasant time shopping, having lunch, and discussing future projects for the house. They had dinner, watched TV, and Phil showered and went to bed around 9:30 p.m. According to Helen, she joined him an hour later, kissed him goodnight, and went to sleep. The investigation in court lasted 6 months, with various pieces of evidence presented and thoroughly analyzed. On May 12, 2011, the judge presented her conclusions, stating there was insufficient evidence to prove Phil intended to take his own life. This conclusion paved the way for a homicide investigation. The investigators took an immediate interest in the case and launched a murder inquiry that lasted several months. On October 27, 2011, Helen was arrested and charged with murder and attempted murder. In the meantime, Helen continued facing legal repercussions for her other actions. In August 2012, she was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison for sending herself insulting text messages, pretending they were from her son. In March 2010, she was denied parole. The murder trial began on December 12, 2013. The The Crown's prosecution spent 2 weeks presenting evidence from over 70 witnesses, asserting that Helen attempted to kill her husband twice, succeeding on the second attempt using doses of the anti-allergy and sedative drug, Phenergan. The motive was believed to be financial, as Helen intended to claim Phil's $250,000 life insurance policy. The financial advisor who sold the policy to the couple in 2008 testified that Phil was present when the policy was purchased, but he suspected Helen filled out the entire form on her husband's behalf. It was also revealed that the insurance policy had a 13-month exclusion clause for voluntary death, which expired in March 2009, just before Helen's alleged attempts on Phil's life. The Crown recounted Helen's purchase of the medication to which Phil was allergic using false names and addresses. They suggested she mixed the drug into Phil's food and, after he was sedated, suffocated him. She then manipulated the scene, sending the fake farewell text and writing the typed note. A DNA test confirmed that the claim about Ben not being Phil's biological son was false. Colleagues of Helen testified that she frequently talked about poisons and her desire to suffocate her husband. A pivotal moment in the trial was Adam's testimony. He recalled visiting the police station with his grandmother on May 13, 2009 after Helen had expressed her desire to kill Phil and even suggested hiring a hitman. When Adam asked why she didn't divorce Phil instead, Helen responded that she didn't want to lose half of the house. Adam recounted seeing his mother in the kitchen on April 15, 2009 with 2 transparent capsules filled with a pale blue powder, which she nervously hid when he noticed. She claimed Phil had a headache. That night, Helen took Phil to the hospital. The next day, Adam warned his stepfather about what he had seen, but Phil dismissed his concerns. The first officer on the scene noted that Helen's prolonged emotional display seemed unnatural. He and his colleague found it suspicious that the farewell text was discovered precisely when they were at the house. Helen's explanation that she stayed in bed with Phil until 2 a.m., then moved to the sofa after taking insulin, was also dubious, as Phil's body was positioned in a way that made it unlikely she had been beside him. Additionally, the farewell text was sent at 10:30 p.m., contradicting her timeline. In court, it was revealed that Helen's mother had written a letter requesting Helen's removal from her will and had accompanied Adam to the police to report Phil's suspected murder. Anne's letter stated that she finally faced the truth about her daughter, describing Helen as either mentally ill or simply evil. The defense maintained that Phil had taken his own life and argued that the Crown's case was based on orchestrated and arbitrary evidence. The Crown presented a circumstantial but solid case, while the defense lawyer warned against convicting Helen based on what he considered subjective evidence. The police admitted initial investigative failings, stating the case should have been treated as a homicide from the start. A jury of 7 men and 5 women deliberated for half a day before rejecting the defense's claim that Phil had taken his own life. They found Helen guilty of murder but not guilty of attempted murder. Helen, then 50, reacted calmly as the jury delivered their verdict. In February 2014, the sentencing hearing for Helen took place at the Christchurch High Court. The judge addressed Helen directly, stating that she committed the crime purely for financial gain, and because she wanted to rid herself of a husband she no longer desired in her life. He added that her actions were even more reprehensible because Phil was an exceptionally kind man who had given her no reason to take his life. The judge agreed with the Crown's assertion that Helen's actions were calculated and cold, describing them as a meticulously planned and executed scheme with cruel disregard for Phil's family and friends. Ultimately, Helen was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 17 years before being eligible for parole for causing Phil's death in 2009 to claim a $250,000 life insurance payout. One of the consequences of the trial was the tarnishing of the police's reputation for initially adhering to the idea of a self-inflicted fatal injury despite indicators of foul play. The media highlighted this issue, which the public deemed crucial. Reports revealed an internal document exposing fundamental flaws in the initial investigation. After the sentencing, Mark Kearns, Helen's first husband, broke his silence, stating that Helen nearly destroyed his relationship with their children. He said he was trying to rebuild his bond with Greg, 25, and Adam, 23, understanding the need to move past the past. Adam, who had filed a civil lawsuit against his mother for falsely accusing him of harassment, won the case in 2014. He argued that Helen's actions caused him pain, distress, humiliation, and financial loss due to his unjust 15-day imprisonment. Helen was ordered to pay Adam Kearns $55,000. However, Helen's impact on Adam's life led to further legal troubles. He faced charges for cannabis sale and illegal possession of a shotgun and appeared in the media for assaulting Justin Marshall, a former New Zealand Super Rugby champion from the early 2000s. Leanne's persistence ensured that Phil's murder did not go unpunished. After the intense legal battle, she, a single mother of 4 living in Australia, wrote a book about the case, published in 2016. By then, she had also started studying criminology and justice at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, hoping to work in the criminal justice system to improve the arduous and stressful path for other victims. The case of Stephen Freeman. Stephen Freeman was born on January 1, 1995, in Thomason, Georgia, to parents Troy and Jennifer Freeman. Alongside his brother Blake, Stephen enjoyed a happy, healthy childhood free of problems with his parents or society. As a friendly, responsive person, he built strong relationships with many friends, who often described him as exceptionally calm. Growing up in Griffin, Stephen attended Spalding High School and later Gordon State College. Mary Catherine Higdon, his future partner, is known for her cheerful, humorous, and friendly personality. Mary expressed her creativity by performing mini-plays for family and neighbors. In their senior years, Mary and Stephen fell deeply in love and remained inseparable. Shared interests brought the couple closer together, as they often spent time in nature, enjoying activities such as hiking, fishing, and hunting. After publicly announcing their relationship on Facebook in February 2012, Stephen frequently posted photos with Mary. Both families were pleased with the young couple's relationship. Mary's family adored Stephen, and his parents welcomed Mary as a second daughter. Upon finishing school, Stephen and Mary moved in together. Stephen secured a job at Drain, Gutters, and Roofing Incorporated as a plumber, while Mary worked as a teacher's assistant at St. George's Episcopal School. She also worked part-time at a local gun store. In 2018, Stephen and his girlfriend Mary had been living together for 7 years. On August 1, 2018, at 10:42 p.m., Mary called emergency services in a panicked state. She claimed she had unknowingly shot her boyfriend with a Glock 43 firearm, thinking it was unloaded. When paramedics and police arrived at their home on Sunnybrook Drive, Mary was in shock, kneeling beside Stephen's motionless body, crying and begging for help. She was eventually pulled away by law enforcement officers, who examined Stephen and provided first aid. Despite his severe chest wound, Stephen was still breathing when paramedics arrived. Stephen, 23, was quickly taken to Spalding Regional Hospital, but his condition worsened, and his heart stopped just before midnight. Mary, still reeling from the incident, was required to give a statement at the police station. During questioning, she reiterated her claim that the shooting was an accident. Mary explained that her home had always had firearms, and her boyfriend Stephen would leave a pistol on the nightstand at night for protection, as they lived outside the city. On the evening in question, Mary claimed she had simply intended to hand Stephen the pistol, and it accidentally went off. She had no knowledge the gun was loaded at the time. Mary emphasized that Stephen was the love of her life and she would never intentionally harm him. When investigators examined the scene, they found evidence suggesting the act might have been planned in advance. In the kitchen, signs of a struggle were visible, with food and dishes scattered around. Detectives Adam Trammell and Chris Wilson found it hard to believe Mary's story and decided to further investigate the evidence. Mary was brought in for another interrogation. This time, the investigators applied pressure. They raised their voices, doubted her account, and demanded honesty. The tactic worked, and she confessed to shooting her boyfriend in a fit of anger. She revealed that they had a severe argument that night, and she wanted to leave him. Investigators recorded the conversation, capturing her admission of guilt and essentially resolving the case with a candid confession. A technical issue occurred, resulting in the loss of most of the recording, with only fragments of interference and indistinct noises remaining. The reason for this technical failure was unknown, and it was surprising that no one had made a backup copy of such crucial evidence. Further investigation led to the discovery that the pistol was not capable of accidental discharge, as it required a deliberate trigger pull. This meant that the gun had to be intentionally pointed at Stephen for the bullet to hit him. Detectives also expressed skepticism about Mary's behavior and questioned whether her distress was genuine or false. They continued to collect evidence, slowly piecing together the case. However, Mary's own words raised another important question about the accident. Investigations revealed that she had previously worked at a gun store, where employees received extensive training on handling firearms before starting work. This strongly suggested that Mary should have known how to safely handle a pistol and that an accident was highly unlikely. The investigation into the accident revealed inconsistencies with the initial testimony. Mary gave multiple conflicting statements during the investigation. Initially, she said Stephen's death was an accident, claiming she was handing him the pistol directly, then it accidentally discharged. However, during further questioning, Mary let slip that she had actually tossed the pistol to Stephen at his request, resulting in the accidental discharge. These contradictory statements raised suspicions, as Mary's story kept changing. As a result, she was detained at the Spalding County Jail and charged with felony malice murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm. Lieutenant Wilson strongly disputed Mary's claim that the incident was an accident and sought to prove that she had deliberately planned the act. A recent discovery shed light on the case. A small amount of cooking grease was found on the pistol slide. This indicated that the pistol had been handled recently, with the magazine possibly being emptied, reloaded, and placed back on a shelf. Mary defended herself by explaining that she was preparing dinner for Stephen on the evening in question, which would explain the grease found on the slide. Despite further investigation, speaking with Mary and Stephen's relatives and friends did not shed much light on the situation. It was revealed that the couple, who began dating as teenagers, had a complex and on-again, off-again relationship marked by numerous breakups and reconciliations. The relationship between Mary and Stephen was tumultuous and often marked by heated arguments. Mary would escalate to screaming at Stephen, physically lashing out at him and prompting him to leave the house for the night to stay with friends. In an attempt to cope with the emotions of the moment, Stephen would usually turn off his phone, while Mary would continue calling and texting him. Mary's behavior went beyond just verbal arguments. She frequently tried to control Stephen's actions, leading to him feeling frustrated and helpless. Furthermore, Stephen confided in his friends about instances where Mary would pull out a pistol during fights, threatening to harm either herself or Stephen. Despite the severity of these incidents, Stephen chose not to report them to the police out of concern that Mary would face jail time. Stephen's friend, Thomas Skinner, revealed some critical information during an interrogation. He stated that just 2 days before the tragic incident, Stephen and Mary had exchanged affectionate messages, wishing each other a good day. However, the situation took a drastic turn the following day, when Stephen told his mother he didn't want to come home because of the unbearable situation, saying he would rather stay with Thomas. On the night of August 1st, 2018, when Stephen failed to come home, Mary sent him hundreds of messages, desperately pleading with him to return. That evening, Mary prepared dinner, expecting her boyfriend Stephen to return home. She found out from Stephen's mother that he was at his friend Thomas's place. Mary drove to pick him up and encountered them on the road. She rolled down her window and told Stephen that she was waiting for him at home for dinner. Stephen agreed to come home, but the evening ended in a tragic incident. A year after Stephen's death, Mary went on trial in June 2019. Before the trial, the prosecution offered Mary a deal: life in prison with the chance of parole if she admitted to the crime. Despite this opportunity, Mary refused the offer and maintained her innocence. During the initial court hearings, Mary vigorously defended herself. She insisted that the incident was an accident and that she had no intention of harming Stephen, emphasizing her deep love for him. She also made a shocking accusation, claiming that Stephen had a history of abusing her. According to her, He physically assaulted her on 2 occasions and even forced himself on her. On the day of the tragic incident, Stephen allegedly attacked her, forcing her to defend herself. It became clear that the couple's relationship had been deteriorating for quite some time. Friends and relatives noted that Mary had been furious with Stephen for frequently ignoring her messages and calls. Mary's behavior had become more and more demanding in the days before the incident, and she had become very insistent on getting her way. On the night of the shooting, Stephen returned home, but he refused to eat the dinner Mary had prepared for him. This rejection seemingly pushed her over the edge, and she fired at him. Prosecutor Kate Leonard presented evidence in court that suggested Mary shot Stephen in anger when Stephen finally came home but refused to eat the dinner Mary had prepared for him. Key evidence included grease found on the pistol, as well as a sheet from the mattress where Stephen was found bleeding. Forensic analysis of bloodstains on the bedsheets showed that Stephen did not attack or approach Mary at the time of the shooting. Instead, the evidence suggested he was calmly sitting on the bed, motionless. If he had been moving, the blood stains would have been more widespread, but they were confined to one area of the sheet. Mary faced the possibility of life imprisonment once again. She made the risky decision to testify truthfully in court, her voice filled with emotion and tears in her eyes. In front of the judge, she described Stephen as a controlling and violent man. She presented evidence to back up her claim, saying she shot Stephen in self-defense after an argument on the night of the incident. Mary sadly shared many stories from her life with Stephen, saying he physically and emotionally abused her. She claimed that Stephen frequently hit her violently and made threats over minor infractions or disobedience. She was constantly manipulated and controlled. Stephen monitored everything she did, from her spending to her friendships and even what she ate. His extreme possessiveness left Mary extremely anxious and depressed. Her feelings of love and fear for Stephen made her hesitant to report his behavior to the authorities. However, reviewing text messages from Mary's old phone raised questions about who was the actual abuser and manipulator in the relationship. These messages, spanning 18 months, showed Stephen's aggression, but they also exposed Mary's infidelity. While some of the messages contained harsh language and threats from Stephen, they were often in response to his own pain and anger caused by Mary's infidelity. Mary said that Stephen had previously forced himself on her twice. She feared he would hurt her again on August 1, 2018, which led her to defend herself. To support Mary's statement, the defense presented expert testimony and called close relatives, including her sister Sarah Higdon. Mary's sister described seeing bruises on Mary's arm 2 weeks before the incident and regretted not photographing them or taking action at the time. During her testimony, Mary expressed her emotions as she recounted the incident of that night. She had decided to end her relationship with Stephen and told him to leave, but he became angry and attacked her. In response, Mary grabbed a pistol from her nightstand, and it accidentally discharged. The prosecution and defense presented conflicting perspectives, the prosecution portraying Stephen as the victim and the defense claiming Mary acted in self-defense. Stephen's friends attempted to portray him positively, describing him as a loyal and hardworking person. They portrayed Mary as a possessive girlfriend who controlled Stephen and threatened to harm herself whenever he tried to leave the relationship. According to Thomas, one of Stephen's closest friends, Mary's behavior had become more and more damaging and unacceptable over time. He claimed she once even pointed a pistol at her head during an argument, implying that her actions were to maintain control over Stephen. Alicia Varela, Stephen's co-worker, testified that Mary would frequently call Stephen throughout the day, even when he was at work. However, during her court testimony, Mary omitted a crucial detail that prosecutor Kate Leonard pointed out. Mary described their relationship as deteriorating and claimed the shooting was in self-defense, but she failed to mention the specific moment when she pulled the trigger. Prosecutor Kate Leonard questioned Mary's claims, noting that during cross-examination, Mary never mentioned Stephen's alleged abuse. To recreate the incident of the shooting, prosecutor Kate held the pistol and described the scene. According to Kate, Stephen came home and the couple argued over dinner. When Stephen refused to eat, Mary, in a rage, threw the prepared food around the kitchen. Stephen then went to the bedroom to avoid further conflict, likely waiting for Mary to calm down. However, instead of calming down, Mary called out to Stephen twice without receiving a response. She then entered the bedroom, where she shot Stephen in the left side of his neck. Kate Leonard concluded her arguments by asking the jury to consider the inconsistencies in Mary's story, which had changed significantly after repeated interrogations. The prosecution presented additional evidence to counter Mary's claims. A forensic examination revealed that Stephen was sitting on the bed at the time of the shooting, contradicting Mary's assertion that he was attacking her. Mary claimed the gun was normally kept unloaded in the house, but detectives suspected it may have been loaded in advance on the evening of August 1, 2018, when Mary was preparing a meal for Stephen. The evidence supporting this theory included grease marks found not only on the slide of the pistol but also inside it, raising questions about whether Mary had loaded the pistol prior to the incident. Everyone who knew Stephen testified that he was not an aggressive person. However, prosecutors noted that Mary repeatedly changed her story at least 10 times during the investigation, which she attributed to her fear. Mary had earlier rejected a plea deal that could have saved her from a death penalty sentence, and the long wait for the verdict was unbearable for her. The jury was persuaded by the arguments presented by jurors Victor and Chris. After hearing from all witnesses and Mary herself, the jury was tasked with making a decision. After careful deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous decision. Mary Catherine Higdon was not guilty on all charges. The jury's decision shocked and outraged many in the courtroom, especially Jennifer Freeman, Stephen's mother, who struggled to contain her anger at the jury as she watched the woman who took her son's life walk free. They found it difficult to comprehend how the jurors could reach such a verdict. Following her acquittal, Mary returned home to Griffin to be with her family. Since then, she has chosen to maintain a low profile, avoiding the public eye and media attention. Her social media presence is minimal, with her Instagram profile set to private. Little is known about Mary's current life, and it is assumed that she has moved on from her difficult past to live a quiet and private life. Stephen's mother paid a heartfelt tribute to her son on social media. In his outgoing spirit, he made friends with everyone he met, but those who shared his passion for hunting and fishing held a special place in his heart. His kind nature, warm smile, and charm left a lasting impression on those around him. Stephen's way of expressing love was unique and special. He made you feel like you were the only person in the world, bringing laughter and joy to those who spent time with him. His warm smile and welcoming hugs made everyone feel loved and appreciated. Bruce and Deborah Bennett married in the 1970s, brimming with hopes and dreams for their future together. Nearing their 20s, the young couple looked forward to building a life side by side. Bruce, born on April 22, 1956 in Denver, Colorado, had an unremarkable childhood as suggested by later accounts with two brothers named Richard and Daniel. Deborah was the eldest of 4 siblings, children of war veteran Ernest Large and his wife, Rosina Martinez. Tragically, Deborah lost her mother at a young age, forcing her to take on the responsibility of caring for her younger siblings alongside her father. The family eventually relocated to Colorado where Larry, one of Deborah's brothers, met Bruce, leading to a friendship that ultimately brought Bruce and Deborah together. The pair soon fell in love and decided to start a family. To support his new family, Bruce enlisted in the Navy, serving as a sonar analyst stationed at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. This job allowed him to work with advanced technology, providing a stable income. During his service, their first daughter, Melissa Bennett, was born in January 1976. Their second daughter, Vanessa, arrived in 1981. After completing his military service, Bruce had succeeded in securing a better financial standing for his family. They settled in Aurora, Colorado, and in 1983, they used their savings and a loan to purchase their first home. Bruce and Deborah joined the family's furniture distribution business, while Bruce also pursued studies to become an air traffic controller. The Bennett family led a quiet life, enjoying their time with their 2 young daughters. However, their peaceful existence was shattered in early 1984. On Sunday, January 15, 1984, the Bennetts hosted a family gathering to celebrate Melissa's upcoming 8th birthday. Deborah had planned a party at school for her daughter, but the family also gathered at the Bennett home for a pre-birthday celebration. The day was filled with laughter, conversation, and a delicious cake. As the evening wound down, Melissa's grandparents and uncles left for their homes. One of the uncles noticed the garage door was open and reminded Bruce to close it, unaware it would be the last time he would see Bruce alive. The next morning, on January 16, 1984, Bruce's mother, Constance Bennett, known as Connie, received a call from the family furniture store. Bruce and Deborah had not shown up for work, and no one was answering the phone at their house. Concerned, Connie decided to check on them. When she arrived at the Bennett home, the garage door was still open. Entering the house, she was met with a horrifying sight. Bruce lay at the foot of the stairs in a pool of blood with severe head trauma and a deep cut across his throat. Shocked and terrified, Connie ran to a neighbor for help. They called 911, and soon, police and medical personnel were on the scene. Inside the house, police discovered Deborah's body in the master bedroom, her head brutally beaten. In the children's room, they found Melissa, also beaten and stabbed, her face covered with a blanket and showing signs of sexual assault. Miraculously, little Vanessa, despite her severe injuries, was still alive. Emergency responders rushed her to the hospital where her life hung by a thread. With Vanessa on the way to the hospital and the bodies of her family members removed, investigators began meticulously examining the Bennett home for clues. They found Deborah's purse outside in the snow, rifled through, likely by the attackers. Nearby, a butcher knife belonging to the Bennetts was discovered, believed to be one of the weapons used in the attacks. While the murder weapon used for the fatal blows was never found, investigators suspected it might have been a hammer based on the injuries and a blood-stained outline found on a carpet. They collected fingerprints and other samples from various surfaces, hoping to find traces that would lead them to the perpetrator. They also noted blood-stained boot prints that the family did not recognize. Family members and close friends who had attended Melissa's birthday party that Sunday were also asked to provide DNA samples. Authorities took these measures hoping that in the future, they could be used for genetic studies, which were in their early stages at that time. Specialists carefully preserved the victim's clothing and, upon thorough examination, collected parts of the carpet beneath Melissa's body as well as a bedspread and other items. Meanwhile, a team of healthcare professionals fought to keep Vanessa alive. The 3-year-old needed 3 units of blood and several units of fluids for the treatment of her numerous injuries. The doctor's report to the family was devastating. Vanessa had a shattered jaw, severe head injuries, and broken arms, hips, and legs. She had also been sexually assaulted. As days passed, investigators realized that the Bennett family attack was not an isolated incident. Less than 2 weeks before the brutal assault on the Bennetts, several similar attacks had occurred in Colorado. One notable case involved the young couple James and Kimberly who lived in the Aurora area. On the night of January 4, 1984, James and Kimberly were spending a quiet evening at home. Kimberly was in the bedroom, and James was recording music tapes for a friend. Suddenly, Kimberly was struck on the head in the dark. She managed to see the silhouette of a man who fled when she began to scream for her husband. James ran to the bedroom and was hit on the head by the hammer-wielding attacker. Despite his injury, James chased the assailant who ultimately escaped. Kimberly, despite her severe head injury, called 911. Emergency services arrived and transported the couple to the nearest hospital. James had a skull fracture and Kimberly had a concussion, but both recovered. The police found the hammer used in the attack. They concluded that the assailant had entered through the garage, whose door was open. Fresh footprints in the snow led away from the house but eventually mixed with other tracks, and the trail was lost. They also found Kimberly's purse in the snow, missing only the money. Less than a week later, another violent incident shocked the Colorado community. Patricia Smith, a 50-year-old woman, had recently moved to Colorado from Nebraska to help her newly divorced daughter settle into a new home with her 2 young children. Patricia was a well-known interior decorator with a prestigious client list known for her kindness, elegance, and activity. On Tuesday, January 10th, Patricia started her day by taking her daughter to a park to catch the bus to work and then dropped off her grandchildren at daycare. She spent the rest of the morning working, picked up laundry at noon, and bought a hamburger for lunch. Arriving home, she went to her room, turned on the TV, and then apparently returned downstairs. Near the front door, she encountered an intruder in the living room. She had no time to react before a flurry of blows ended her life. That evening, around 5:30, her daughter was waiting at the park for her mother to pick her up. When Patricia did not arrive as usual, she called home from a public phone, but no one answered. Concerned, she called a cousin who picked her up along with the children and took them home. Upon arrival, they noticed the garage door open, and inside the darkened house, a flickering light from the TV upstairs. She found her mother's body on the floor, covered with a child's blanket with obvious signs of bleeding. Patricia's pants and boots were scattered around, and her upper clothing was open, indicating another brutal assault. Beside her lay a hammer. Unable to believe what she was seeing, the terrified daughter ran to a neighbor's house asking for help to confirm if her mother was still alive. Unfortunately, she was not. They immediately called 911. After Patricia's body was taken to the morgue for examination, the autopsy revealed 17 head injuries and confirmed sexual assault. Investigators deduced that after killing Patricia, the attacker went upstairs, stole money from her purse, and then fled. The investigation extended to Patricia's close acquaintances, including clients with whom she had had disagreements, but no leads emerged. That same day, January 10th, another young woman was attacked. Her name was Donna. She was a flight attendant for Frontier Airlines, and her partner, Ron, was a pilot. That evening, Donna was off duty and awaiting Ron's return from a night flight. After shopping for groceries, she collected the mail and parked her car in the garage. As she exited her vehicle, she was struck on the temple and lost consciousness. The following morning, Ron returned home to find a red trail from the garage to the house. He rushed inside and followed the trail to the bedroom where he found Donna lying on the bed with a head wound. Somehow, Donna had managed to make it to the bedroom. Ron called 911 immediately. Paramedics arrived and rushed Donna to the hospital where she received treatment. Doctors confirmed she had been sexually assaulted. Initially, Ron was considered a suspect, but he had just landed in Colorado, and Donna's attack had occurred hours earlier. Investigators found a hammer covered in blood in the driver's seat of Donna's car. They collected it as evidence but found no useful fingerprints. Despite her severe injuries, Donna recovered, though the head injury left her with significant short-term memory loss, unable to recall the night of the attack. This lack of memory was, in some ways, a blessing to Donna, who was grateful to have survived. 6 days later, less than 25 miles from Donna and Ron's home, the horrific attack on the Bennett family occurred. Throughout that tragic January, while the families of the deceased mourned their losses, those who survived, like little Vanessa, continued their recovery. The Bennett family, especially Vanessa's grandmother, Connie, held out hope for the child's recovery. The investigation stretched on. Investigators collected all possible evidence from the 4 crime scenes, including genetic material, footprints, and other clues. However, in the 1980s, forensic technology was far less advanced than today, and analysis was just beginning. The attacks occurred in both Aurora and Lakewood, leading local police to share information. Unfortunately, no useful fingerprints were found at the crime scenes or on the hammers used in the attacks. The FBI brought in, and a profiler studied the case, concluding that the attacker was likely an opportunistic rather than predator. He did not target specific victims, but seemed to roam neighborhoods looking for easy access, such as open garage doors. Once inside, his attacks were swift, violent, and fatal, followed by sexual assault, theft of money only. The profiler estimated that the perpetrator was a young man around 20 years old, intelligent, but not highly educated, possibly a high school graduate, but not a college student. The repeated use cameras and a rugged boot print found at one scene suggested he worked in construction. At the time, numerous homes were being built in the areas where the crimes occurred. Most worryingly, the profiler asserted that this man would attacking until he was caught. Using this profile, investigators visited construction sites, talking to contractors and seeking information about any unusual behavior among workers. However, contractor records were not thorough, and no useful descriptions of the attacker were available since all assaults were sudden and occurred in darkness. While the investigation continued without new leads, the community was gripped by fear, became vigilant about locking their garages and doors with some buying guns or even wearing helmets to bed. Time passed without further attacks, and the police were forced to move on to new cases, leaving these brutal crimes unresolved. Survivors of the assaults were recovering and trying to move past the trauma of their harrowing experiences, while the families of the victims continued to grapple with the pain of their loss. Periodically, the original investigators of the attacks, along with those who replaced them, would contact specialized departments and laboratory, hoping that advances in DNA technology might finally identify the perpetrator. In 1990, Aurora police sent samples from a bedspread, a carpet, and other items collected from the Bennett crime scene to a forensic examiner in Richmond, California. Unfortunately, no significant progress was made at the time. During a new review of the evidence, investigators found a blonde pubic hair and sent it for specialized analysis. However, due to the primitive technology of the time, the test destroyed this single hair without yielding any results. It wasn't until February 2001, 17 years after the attacks, that full identification of the DNA samples was achieved, ruling out family members as potential suspects. It took another 3 years to definitively link the family case with Patricia's case, as the same DNA was found in samples from both crime scenes. Yet the DNA belonged to an unknown individual, and finding a match in existing databases was challenging. Databases across the U.S. were still in their infancy, with each state and agency having its own rules. In 2018, in another attempt to solve the cases, detectives teamed up with a genealogist. She used the sequenced DNA and began searching public and private databases. Within a week, she informed the detectives that the DNA to someone with the last name Ewing. This was a significant breakthrough. Police found 3 or 4 in Colorado with the last name Ewing, but they were all ruled out as suspects. Further searches in Aurora's databases revealed 40 individuals with the surname Ewing. Investigators began analyzing each one while handling other cases. Finally, in July 2018, they discovered a match with an inmate in Nevada. The man, Alex Ewing. He was born on August 14, 1960 in North Carolina. Little is known about his childhood, and he never spoke about it, but it is known that he dropped out of school after the 10th grade. He claimed he was expelled for frequently getting drunk. This was the beginning of a life of crime. Alex was detained months in a juvenile center in Sacramento, California for theft. He was later sent to a foster home where he stayed for 2 weeks before being released. He then embarked on a criminal career, being arrested multiple times in Arizona and Florida for theft, burglary, and escape. According to a driver's license he obtained in 1983, Alex was living in Denver, Colorado. The attacks occurred in early 1984, leaving injured and 4 dead over 12 days. The assault stopped when Alex left Colorado, moving to Kingman, Arizona a few days later. There, on January 27, 1984, he broke into a home and attacked Roy Williams with a granite rock, hitting him in the head and chest. Roy survived, requiring 100 stitches. He gave a partial description of his attacker. Later that day, a police officer spotted a man matching the description hiding in bushes near an interstate on-ramp. The officer approached, and Alex fled. After a chase, Alex was apprehended. On February 2, 1984, Alex was formally charged with attempted first-degree murder and first-degree robbery and held in jail in Utah. In early August 1984, Alex and several inmates were transported from jail for a court hearing. During a stop at a service station, he escaped. Wearing red shorts and an orange jumpsuit, he ran and disappeared. At 10 p.m., police received calls about a suspicious man in red shorts running through a neighborhood. An hour later, Nancy Berry called 911 in a panic, saying she and her husband had been attacked. Nancy and her husband, Chris, were found severely injured in their bed. Alex had broken in through their open garage door and attacked them with an axe handle. Fortunately, their children were unharmed. A massive manhunt ensued, but Alex remained elusive. For days later, he was spotted at a phone booth, apparently calling his brother for help. He tried to flee, but weakened and dehydrated was captured. Back in custody, Alex faced trial and was charged with attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, robbery, and escape. He was sentenced to 110 in prison. Meanwhile, he had been at large for less than 8 months after the Colorado attacks. In July 2018, a team of Colorado police and prosecutors traveled to the Northern Nevada Correctional Center to interview Alex. Initially posing as non-law enforcement, they did not mention the Colorado crimes. However, with the breakthrough in DNA technology and genealogy research, they finally had the evidence needed to connect Alex Ewing to the heinous crimes that had haunted Colorado for over 3 decades. In this conversation, Alex recounted that his father was in the Air Force and discussed his abandonment of school, claiming he had suffered from spinal meningitis, which led to a near-death experience and a change in his behavior. He also mentioned that before arriving in Nevada, he had spent an unspecified time in Colorado working in construction in Aurora and Lakewood. He said he left because it was too cold. This information confirmed Alex's presence in Colorado. The next day, a detective returned to meet with him, showing 6 black and white photographs of the crimes in that state. Initially, Alex denied knowing any of the victims. However, when shown a color photo of Patricia alive, he still claimed not to know her. But upon seeing a color image of her body, he became visibly agitated, insisted there must be a mistake, and immediately requested a lawyer. Alex had not anticipated this turn of events. After 34 years in prison, he was preparing documents to request parole, which he could do after serving 40 years. Confident in his release, he even created a profile on a dating site. Following this meeting, Colorado detectives obtained a court order to collect an additional cheek swab from Alex. The DNA results confirmed a match with samples from the Bennett and Patricia crime scenes. With this confirmation, police began notifying the families and survivors of the 1984 attacks, informing them they had finally found the perpetrator. However, justice would still take time. The first step was to request Alex's extradition from Nevada to Colorado for trial. The first extradition hearing took place on October 2, 2018. Alex informed the judge he planned to fight the extradition, and over the next 16 months, his lawyer filed appeals at every possible level. Meanwhile, Colorado prosecutors were considering their options. Unfortunately, for cases without fatalities, prosecution was impossible due to a 3-year statute of limitations. However, Alex could be tried for the fatal attacks, which meant he would be prosecuted for the deaths of the 3 Bennett family members and Patricia under Colorado's 1984 laws. At the time of the crimes, the maximum penalty was life without parole, as the death penalty was not applicable. On February 21, 2020, the Nevada Supreme Court ordered Alex's transfer to Colorado to face charges. His lawyer made an emergency appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, but it was declined. On February 28, 2020, Alex was flown to Colorado, and 2 days later, he appeared in court for his first hearing. The trial for the Bennett family case began on July 27, 2021. The prosecution's case centered on Alex's confirmed DNA presence in semen traces found near Melissa's body. They highlighted the similarities in modus operandi, comparing it to the fatal attack on Patricia. Both cases involved brutal hammer attacks, sexual assault, and the bodies being left partially naked with faces covered. The attacker had entered through open garages, and the women's purses were found ransacked nearby. The defense attempted to undermine the investigators' professionalism, claiming mishandling of DNA samples and noting the absence of fingerprints or touch DNA at the crime scenes. The prosecution countered that Alex could have worn gloves. The jury heard from police, firefighters, investigators, and specialists. The most impactful testimony came from Connie Bennett, Bruce's mother, who described finding the horrific crime scene at her son's home. The jury also saw photographs taken at the Bennett residence. After deliberating for only 3.5 hours, the jury sent a note to the judge stating they were deadlocked. The prosecutor requested the judge instruct the jury to continue deliberations while the defense sought a mistrial. The judge decided it was too soon for a mistrial and asked the jury to return the next day. After 6 more hours of discussion, the jury found Alex Ewing guilty of the charges, including 3 counts of murder, robbery, and other offenses. On August 2021, before sentencing, family members, including Connie and Vanessa, the only survivor, gave impact statements. When asked if he had anything to say, Alex simply replied, "No. Thank you." The judge harshly criticized Alex, stating that in all his years in the justice system, he had never encountered such depravity. He ensured Alex would never be free again, sentencing him to 3 consecutive life sentences, preventing the possibility of parole after 20 years. In October 2021, the trial for Patricia Smith's case began, but was declared a mistrial after Alex's defense requested a competency hearing to evaluate his mental state. The competency evaluation concluded that Alex was indeed mentally fit to stand trial. After delays, the trial finally took place in early April 2022. Unlike the first trial, Alex spoke up, complaining about his extradition from Nevada, accusing the system of being rigged and alleging that authorities had ignored his efforts to lead them to the real criminals. Despite his arguments, the result was another life sentence, adding to the 3 he already had. Unfortunately, nothing could change the past. During the trial, Vanessa, the only survivor of the Bennett family, was present. Many might wonder what became of her after the tragedy. Vanessa shared her story in interviews with several media outlets describing a difficult life. Vanessa recounted that the brutal attack left her with severe physical and mental scars. After waking from a coma weeks after the assault, she had to relearn how to walk and do everything again. She mentioned having permanent physical injuries, including partial paralysis on her left side, making it hard for her to grip or release objects. However, the mental scars were even more profound. After being discharged from the hospital, Vanessa spent 2 months in a center for abused children before moving in with her grandmother. Filled with rage, she struggled at school where children mocked her, exacerbating her anger. She became rebellious, and her grandmother eventually enrolled her in a boarding school. During her first summer back home, she attempted suicide. Fortunately, the family intervened in time, and after recovery, she was sent to a psychiatric ward and then to a group home until she turned 18. At 18, Vanessa became pregnant, and social services took her child as she admitted she did not know how to be a mother. Later, she had 2 more daughters who were placed in the care of a cousin, and she was not allowed to see or know their whereabouts. Vanessa developed borderline personality disorder, PTSD, bipolar disorder, and ADHD. Her fragmented memories of her family and life before the attack, coupled with severe mental instability and a drug addiction that began at 19, took a toll on her psyche. Vanessa explained that she used drugs to escape the world and forget everything, but this path led her to jail multiple times for shoplifting, assault, domestic violence, burglary, and drug possession. She lived homeless for a long time, residing under a bridge with a partner. This was her situation when she learned that her attacker had been caught. Despite the hardships, Vanessa found a ray of hope. By the age of 30, she decided to stop being a victim and dedicated herself to staying clean. She lived in an apartment with her second husband and had a cat. Vanessa aspired to obtain a university degree to become a counselor and help those struggling with substance abuse. When asked if she felt relieved when Alex was finally identified and punished, Vanessa said no. She expressed that while catching the killer might make others feel better, it meant nothing to her. The damage had already been done. Her life was ruined. The case of Elizabeth Arellano. Elizabeth Paula Arellano was born on August 16, 1987, in Fort Worth, Texas, USA. She grew up with 2 close sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna. Her biological father left and Elizabeth was very young and never contacted or cared for her. Later, her mother, Juanita, remarried Fidel. He adopted Elizabeth and her sisters, treating them as his own children. Elizabeth has a very good relationship with her stepfather, who always supports and helps her in everything. Elizabeth was a hardworking student and dreamed of becoming a doctor in the future. During high school, Elizabeth met and fell in love with Rudolph Arellano, a boy nearly 8 years younger than her. Although Elizabeth's parents felt a bit uneasy about this age difference, they did not interfere in their daughter's relationship because they saw Rudolph as a serious and trustworthy man. Shortly after graduating from high school at the age of 16, Elizabeth married Rudolph. They had 4 children together, 3 boys and 1 girl. However, Elizabeth did not want to be just a housewife. Remembering her childhood dream, she decided to pursue a career in medicine. After graduating from medical school, Elizabeth worked as a paramedic and planned to continue her studies to become a doctor. She was kind, raised in a Christian family. She regularly took her children to church and taught them to love and care for those around them. Her family and friends commented that she was sensitive and always ready to help others. On the surface, her marriage to Rudolph seemed happy and stable. However, after 13 years of marriage, their relationship began to have serious problems. Previously, Rudolph had been jealous and tried to control his wife in everything. Over time, his behavior became increasingly unacceptable. In the 2016, Elizabeth decided to leave home with her children and move in with her parents after witnessing her husband's jealousy once again. Although Rudolph tried to reconcile, Elizabeth was tired of his hot temper. She also did not want her children to witness the constant quarrels between their parents. Therefore, she boldly filed for divorce. Just a few days after Elizabeth left with her children and filed for divorce, she suddenly disappeared under mysterious circumstances. According to friends and family, Elizabeth had previously appeared very cheerful. To relieve stress from family problems and the divorce process, she decided to go out with her colleagues to a local club after work. On Friday night, April 15, 2016, Elizabeth, then 28 years old, went out with friends at a club. There, she danced and had fun but did not drink alcohol because she had driven there and planned to drive herself home. After midnight, around the early morning of April 16th, Elizabeth drove home. After parking her car, she called a friend who had gone out with her to let her know that she had arrived safely. However, after hanging up the phone, Elizabeth mysteriously disappeared without entering the house. The next morning, Juanita, Elizabeth's mother, was very worried when she discovered that her daughter was not home. Although she knew that Elizabeth had planned to spend the evening with her friends, her daughter should have returned home a long time ago. Elizabeth was not in the habit of going out without notice, and her car was still parked outside the house, indicating that she had returned from the club. When Juanita approached the car, she found that it was unlocked. The keys were still in the ignition, and Elizabeth's wallet and cell phone were on the seat. Leaving personal belongings in the car open like that was completely out of her daughter's habit, which made Juanita think that something bad had happened. Without hesitation, she immediately called the police to report her daughter as missing. The police believed that they could quickly solve Elizabeth's missing person case. They still hoped that she was alive because they did not find any blood or signs of a struggle in the car. However, the investigation was more complicated than expected. The first step was to reconstruct Elizabeth's itinerary on the night of her disappearance in detail to identify and interview witnesses. Police interviewed Elizabeth's friends and co-workers who had seen her that night. They confirmed the time Elizabeth left and said she had called back to say she had arrived home safely. Elizabeth's phone contained multiple calls and text messages from her ex-husband, Rudolph, that night, but she did not answer. When police questioned Rudolph, he said Elizabeth had promised to bring the children to his house that weekend. However, she had not contacted him since then, and he thought she had changed her mind. There were still some unclear points about Rudolph's alibi. Rudolph said he had been at a local bar that night with a friend, then went home to sleep around midnight. Several people at the bar confirmed seeing he there, but no one knew for sure where he went after he left. Rudolph claimed to have returned home, but since he lived alone, no one could corroborate this. So the police have not ruled him out as a suspect. Notably, Rudolph did not appear to be upset or worried. Although he and Elizabeth were in the process of divorcing after many years of marriage and having children, it was strange that her disappearance did not seem to affect him. A strange incident occurred the night Elizabeth went missing. A fisherman called the police to report what he had witnessed. He said that around 4:30 a.m., while fishing on a highway bridge, he saw a car stop. The driver pulled out a large object that looked like a person and threw it into the water. The object appeared to have a heavy object tied to it. Due to the distance in the darkness, the fisherman could not clearly see the details or the license plate. The strong wind on the bridge also prevented him from hearing anything. Later, another witness was found. This person was walking his dog under the bridge. He did not see the incident on the bridge, but heard a terrible scream. Then he saw a large object fall from the bridge, heard a splash, and then everything went silent. Based on the testimony of the witnesses, the police decided to check the bottom of the pond near the bridge. After several hours of searching, divers discovered a body tied to a large concrete block with a rope around the neck. The body was identified as Elizabeth Arellano, who had gone missing earlier. The discovery of this body was only possible thanks to the testimony of the passerby and the fisherman. Without their information, the body might not have been found or would have been discovered only after a very long time, because the weight of the concrete block prevented the body from floating to the surface. Initially, a hypothesis was put forward that Elizabeth had voluntarily ended her life due to family problems. However, details of how the body was discovered suggest it may have been a murder. However, this theory is not credible because it contradicts two important sources of information. First, an eyewitness reported seeing someone throw Elizabeth into the water. Second, her relatives confirmed that Elizabeth had many future plans and would never do anything to harm her children and parents. Elizabeth was still alive and a piece of concrete was tied around her neck and she was thrown off the bridge. This is supported by the results of the forensic examination, which showed that she had suffocated, and by the testimony of a man who heard her screams of despair as she was thrown off the bridge. However, many questions remain unanswered about this murder. Who were the perpetrators, and what was their motive for being so cruel to a mother of many children? Robbery can be ruled out because none of Elizabeth's property was taken. Some theories suggest that the killer may have spotted Elizabeth at the club and secretly followed her home, or that someone was waiting at her home for her return. Her ex-husband, Rudolph, still insisted that he was asleep at his house on the night of the murder and had nothing to do with the crime, however. Investigators were reluctant to rule Rudolph out as a suspect because he had no alibi and his behavior raised more and more questions. At the Elizabeth's funeral, he pretended to be sad. He cried by his ex-wife's coffin and said that he wished he had died instead of her or with her. His sister Elizabeth believed that his words were sincere. Rudolph also actively helped set up a charity fund to organize a farewell ceremony for his wife. However, after the funeral, when he was summoned to take a statement again, his attitude and behavior completely changed, as if nothing serious had happened in his life. After a thorough examination of CCTV footage along Elizabeth's final route, a car identical to Rudolph's was seen leaving her parents' home at around 3 a.m. A neighbor also confirmed seeing the car parked near the victim's home. Notably, the car was later spotted moving towards the bridge where she was thrown. This raised many questions. When the investigation found Rudolph's cell phone data from the night of the incident, more questions were raised. That night, he made several phone calls from different locations, near Elizabeth's workplace, then near her parents' home. He also sent several text messages to Elizabeth, trying to determine when she would be home, but received no response. Apparently, he was following Elizabeth and decided to wait for her at her parents' home. Eventually, with enough evidence gathered, the police arrested Rudolph as the prime suspect and took him to the station for further questioning. A key witness in the case was Elizabeth and Rudolph's eldest son. When shown the rope that had been removed from around his mother's neck, he recognized that he had seen and played with it in his father's backyard. He also remembered that there was a piece of concrete in the yard before the fence was replaced. Similar pieces of concrete were found in the trunk of Rudolph's car. The investigation revealed that Rudolph had waited for Elizabeth at her parents' house and kidnapped her before she entered the house. He forced her into the car, which had rope and concrete in the trunk. He then drove to the bridge to commit the murder. Rudolph Arellano was arrested 10 days after his ex-wife's body was found in the lake. Despite overwhelming evidence and witness testimony against him, Rudolph denied any involvement and insisted that he was home the night of the crime. For this brutal crime, Rudolph faced the death penalty. Then, on the advice of his lawyer, he decided to confess and cooperate with the investigation to reduce his sentence. It was not until January 2019 that Rudolph officially pleaded guilty in court and detailed the kidnapping and murder of his ex-wife and was the mother of their 4 children. Juanita, who was present in court to hear the testimony, fainted. Alessandra and Giovanna, the victim's sisters, called their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph admitted to the murder but showed no remorse or guilt. He spoke coldly about his actions, without apologizing or explaining his reasons. The court sentenced Rudolph to life in prison without parole. Elizabeth's family said the sentence was too light, but they decided to forgive Rudolph so as not to live in hatred. Currently, Elizabeth's parents and sister are taking care of and raising her children. The case of Jorge Cortez. Jorge Humberto Martinez Cortez was born on January 5, 1978, in Mexico City. He kept his childhood and teenage years private, only sharing that he often clashed with his mother, who cared deeply for him, and his father, who rarely intervened in their arguments. Jorge's strained family relationships likely contributed to his emotional isolation and the development of his aggressive and unstable personality. To escape his difficult home life, Jorge left at a young age and embarked on a journey across Mexico, taking on temporary jobs to support himself. He worked as a waiter in various bars in Mexico City, including those in the Rosa and Kona districts, and also relied on tips from tourists in the popular Villadú and Cuac districts, known for their extensive infrastructure and diverse entertainment options. Jorge's life of crime began in this place. In February 2010, he was arrested for theft and given a 4-year prison sentence. However, because it was his first offense, the judge decided to release him on bail. At the time, no one suspected that this decision would set free a man who would later become one of Mexico's most notorious criminals. After his release, Jorge met a girl named Adriana and fell in love. Initially, he treated her with kindness and attention, but as their relationship deepened, his behavior became increasingly violent. Adriana soon found herself a victim of his physical abuse. Exhausted by his cruelty, she decided to end the relationship, but Jorge refused to accept her decision. One night, Jorge violently attacked Adriana, dragging her down the stairs by her hair and breaking her nose. He beat her so severely that she lost consciousness. When she came to, she saw Jorge holding a lighter and threatening to kill them both if she didn't stay with him. Despite his threats, Adriana continued to resist, which further enraged Jorge. He attempted to strangle her by grabbing her neck with both hands. However, Adriana managed to break free, grabbed a hammer, and began fighting back. She was able to force Jorge out of the apartment and ultimately out of her life for good. This violent confrontation occurred in 2011, and although Adriana reported the incident to the police, Jorge was released on bail and avoided punishment. In hindsight, Adriana's escape from Jorge that night saved her from a potentially deadly situation. Jorge would go on to take the lives of multiple women in the future. After meeting Jorge, 18-year-old Yang Kyung-Marie became his new victim. Yang was a Korean girl who was very close to her mother, Monica, and her sisters, particularly Anna. Anna was a lively and athletic young woman who balanced her studies in psychology with a part-time job at a restaurant. Yang met Jorge at one of the bars where he worked, and they were immediately drawn to each other. After a brief courtship, they started dating, but their relationship was marked by violence. Despite their frequent arguments, they stayed together. When Yang turned 19, she decided to declare her independence from her family and move to the city with Jorge. However, this change only made their problems worse. Jorge's behavior became increasingly controlling and abusive. He constantly monitored Yang's activities, calling her every hour at work and restricting her interactions with friends. As a result, Yang felt trapped and realized she was a victim of domestic violence. However, she hid the truth from others, including her family, to avoid causing them concern. Only a few close people, including her sister Anna and some friends, knew about the situation. Despite her family's warnings and advice to leave Jorge, Yang struggled to break free. She attempted to leave him multiple times but always returned, held back by her own fears and vulnerabilities. During this time, Yang underwent a significant transformation, changing from a happy and lively person to someone who was depressed and willing to do anything to please Jorge. The relationship continued to deteriorate, becoming increasingly toxic and damaging to Yang's well-being. Yang's relationship with Jorge was marked by violent outbursts. On one occasion, Jorge refused to let Yang into their apartment when she came home late. On another, he locked her inside, set her clothes on fire, and chased her around the room in a fit of rage. In August 2014, their arguments escalated, and Yang decided to leave Jorge and move in with her parents. A friend encouraged her to report Jorge to the police and end the abuse. Although Yang initially agreed, she eventually returned to Jorge and they continued living together. Tragically, Yang's life was cut short. On September 21st, her body was discovered in their apartment, bearing signs of severe bruising. Jorge claimed to have found Yang hanging in the bedroom, stating that he had left her sleeping at noon the previous day, September 20th, after she had worked a shift at the bar. Jorge claimed that he returned home on the morning of September 21st to find Yang deceased. He immediately contacted the police and notified Yang's family of the tragic event. The news of Yang's death was devastating to her family, prompting Monica and Anna to rush to the scene. Upon arrival, they found police officers and forensic experts already at the apartment, carefully removing Yang's body from the bed. Jorge stated that when he saw his deceased wife, he became frantic and attempted to assist her. A police officer explained to the family that an investigation was ongoing and they needed to stay outside the house to protect potential evidence. As they watched, Yang's body, covered with a sheet, was carried out of the house. The police also informed them that the initial evidence suggested Yang's death was a suicide, a conclusion supported by the position of the body in Jorge's account, which the police believed to be truthful. However, Yang's family was skeptical and struggled to accept this explanation, finding it hard to believe that she would take her own life. When the family arrived to identify the body and prepare the necessary documents, they were surprised to find that the examination protocol was almost complete. The death certificate stated that Yang had died from strangulation by hanging. However, when the relatives were allowed to view the body, they noticed bruises on Yang's legs that seemed suspicious. Jorge attempted to explain the bruises by saying that the body had slipped from his hands and fallen to the floor when he tried to move it from the bed. Monica was not convinced by Jorge's explanation and suspected that something was not quite right. Investigations revealed more about Yang's tumultuous relationship with Jorge, fueling suspicion that her death might not be the suicide police claimed. During police testimony, friends described constant fighting between they, revealing Jorge's history of jealousy and aggression. His behavior extended to frequent phone calls to Yang's workplace, indicating a pattern of controlling behavior. Yang's sister Anna noted that a few months before the tragedy, her behavior dramatically shifted. Anna added that she started distancing herself from the family once the relationship with Jorge started. This prompted concern within the family. Despite growing concerns about Jorge's unstable behavior and doubts about the official explanation, the police were quick to dismiss theories and rushed to close the case. Experts at the Katak morgue recommended cremating Yang's body, which meant that further forensic investigation would not be possible. Yang's mother was deeply suspicious of Jorge's involvement in her daughter's death, but she eventually agreed to the cremation due to pressure from her family, thereby giving up the chance to gather evidence to support her suspicions. Jorge did not attend the funeral, but he got a tattoo of a broken heart, supposedly to show his grief. However, he also cut off all contact with Yang's family. Yang's death had a devastating impact on her family, especially her mother, Monica. The overwhelming pain of losing her daughter, combined with feelings of loneliness and despair, led Monica to develop an addiction to alcohol and smoking. Monica was devastated when her daughter Young passed away suddenly. Despite her overwhelming grief, Monica refused to accept the initial explanation of Yang's death, finding it contradictory to her daughter's outgoing and life-loving nature. Unsettled by details like the bruises on Yang's body and the lack of evidence supporting the claimed manner of death, Monica's instincts told her there was more to the story. To get answers, Monica launched her own investigation into the case. Monica acquired security footage from her daughter's home, revealing her son-in-law Jorge was the last person to see Yang alive. With the help of a private attorney and forensic pathologist, Monica reviewed Yang's final days. An unexpected development led to a shocking explanation, revealing a deeply seated scandal and a misclassified homicide. Monica's determination uncovered hidden details, ultimately revealing the truth behind Yang's death. The detective completely rejected the initial account of Yang's death, presenting conclusive evidence that proved she was murdered. Further investigation revealed several discrepancies with the original autopsy. There were no signs of hanging on Yang's body, but her neck showed signs of strangulation, and a scarf had been used to make it appear as though she had hanged herself. Bruises on her hands and fingernails suggested she had tried to fight back. The medical examiner confirmed that any competent expert would have reached the same conclusion. This raises serious questions. Why did the police ignore these facts? And why did the family receive a false report about their daughter's death? Monica's relentless pursuit of truth led her to conduct a 7-month investigation, uncovering a series of disturbing failures and incompetence by law enforcement agencies. Her research revealed that Yang had previously reported violence by Jorge to the police, but her cries for help were ignored. Monica also discovered that Jorge had ties to his father and the staff handling the case, which, combined with the severity of Yang's injuries and the apparent negligence of the authorities, compelled her to take decisive action. Monica appealed to the prosecutor's office, seeking a review of the case and justice for Jorge, the main suspect. However, she was met with neglect and cynicism instead of support. A prosecutor even questioned her competence, suggesting she should focus on being a housewife and seek psychological help rather than pursuing justice. Undeterred, Monica continued her investigation, driven by her love for her child and her desire for truth. Her perseverance ultimately paid off. Jorge committed another murder in 2016, a devastating end to Yang's story. This event began a new chapter in Campira's life. She met Jorge online, where he hid his dark nature behind a charming facade. Unaware of his past, she was drawn to his friendly, sociable personality, and they soon developed a romantic relationship. Campira's close friends discovered her new relationship when she posted a photo of herself and her boyfriend on social media, beaming with happiness. For several weeks, their romance seemed perfect. As 2016 drew to a close, Campira's mother, Margarita, met Jorge for the first time on December 28th. Campira, Jorge, and her children then traveled to Acapulco to spend the New Year's holidays with her parents. However, Jorge later convinced Campira to extend their stay, and she asked her mother to watch the children for a few more days. Margarita agreed, unaware of the tragedy that was about to unfold. 3 days later, Campira was found dead. The last time Margarita had spoken to her daughter was on December 30th. When Margarita tried to call Campira on New Year's Eve, she was met with silence. Campira always answered her phone or returned calls promptly, so Margarita's anxiety grew with each passing minute. As the hours ticked by, Campira's unusual silence and lack of online activity only heightened Margarita's concerns. Eventually, Margarita decided to contact Jorge to find out what had happened to her daughter. Jorge attempted to alleviate Margarita's concerns by downplaying the argument and Campira departure to celebrate the new year with friends. However, Margarita remained unconvinced and asked a family friend to check on Campira. When the friend arrived at Campira's house, Jorge told him that Campira was asleep and unable to meet with him. Margarita's suspicions grew, and she sensed that Jorge was hiding something. On December 31st, between 5 o'clock and 8 p.m., Jorge committed a heinous crime. He brutally murdered Campira by strangling her after beating her severely with an unknown object, leaving multiple injuries on her face and body. In an attempt to make it appear as though Campira had taken her own life, Jorge cut a lock of her hair, placed her body on the bed, covered it with a blanket, and left the gas stove on. He even placed a portrait of Campira's late ex-husband in her hand to create the illusion that memories of him had driven her to suicide. Around 8:30 p.m., Jorge packed his belongings and left the house. On the night of January 1st, 2017, Margarita tried to contact her daughter Campira to wish her a happy new year, but was unable to reach her. She then called her son Gabriel, who was in the same city as Campira, and asked him to check on her. When Gabriel arrived at his sister's house, he was immediately hit with a strong smell of gas. After turning off the gas burners, he began searching for Campira and was shocked to find her body on the couch, bearing signs of a brutal beating on her face. As Gabriel threw off the blanket covering his sister's body, he was horrified by what he saw. Campira was wearing only her underwear, and her body was covered in numerous bruises. Several details caught his attention. There were drops of blood around her, although her body and underwear appeared clean, as if she had recently bathed. Additionally, Campira's head was almost completely shaved, which struck Gabriel as strange, as his sister was known to take great care of her hair. Gabriel reported the incident to the police and then called his mother to break the news to Margarita. Paramedics and police arrived, confirmed Campira's death, and restricted access to the scene. The family was stunned by grief, struggling to come to terms with what happened. Their eyes reflected sadness and a glimmer of hope for justice. The investigation was complicated by inconsistencies between the crime scene and the initial assumption of suicide. The police meticulously examined every detail to unravel the truth. The police initially suspected suicide, but Camper's family disputed this, finding it impossible to believe that a young, cheerful woman would take such a drastic step. Campira's family was convinced that her death was not a suicide, but a violent crime. A strand of hair found on her body that did not match anyone in the house reinforced their suspicions. They demanded a more thorough investigation, which was granted. A second forensic examination confirmed their fears, revealing that Campira was strangled and that the suicide scene was staged. The evidence included marks on her trachea and neck, bruises indicating a beating, and the absence of a strand of hair. The police launched an investigation, and Campira's aunt, Sandra, worked with the deputy prosecutor to have the case transferred to the prosecutor's office. However, progress was slow. Later, Sandra was called back to the prosecutor's office and informed that she and her brother, Gabriel, could be plaintiffs in the case. Campira's children were left with their grandmother after the tragedy. To shield them from painful memories, they were transferred to a new school. However, time alone didn't heal their wounds. 2 months later, the family was allowed to visit the apartment where Campira's body was found, collecting her belongings and possibly uncovering clues. Her laptop was found, but its data had been deleted. Fortunately, her iPad was password protected, and the last photos she took before her death were recovered. One disturbing photo showed Campira lying next to Jorge on the same sofa where her body was later found. Further investigation of the photos revealed more evidence. In one image, Jorge was seen holding a skull-shaped container that was later discovered in the apartment's freezer. He was also shown strangling Campira with one hand. Drawers in the desk yielded sketches of tattoos Jorge planned to get, further hinting at his possible involvement in the crime. The public was outraged when Jorge was released on bail in February 2009, sparking widespread anger. Many realized that if he had been detained earlier, the young women might still be alive. The Campira and young families continued to demand justice for their loved ones on social media, gathering over 13,000 supporters on a memorial page. 10 months after his escape, Jorge was finally caught on October 24, 2017. His arrest was unexpected, occurring during a routine patrol by the National Civilian Police in Livingston, Guatemala. The officers were patrolling the streets when they noticed a suspicious man who appeared to be homeless. A routine check of his documents and fingerprints revealed a shocking truth. The man was on the international wanted list with a high danger level. Jorge was immediately arrested and taken to the immigration center in Guatemala City, where he was detained pending further action. The Guatemalan authorities quickly contacted their Mexican counterparts to initiate the extradition process. According to the head of the Guatemalan police, Pablo Castillo, Jorge had been hiding under a bridge in western Guatemala, living on the streets and relying on the kindness of tourists for survival. The next day, October 25th, Jorge was transported to the Mexican border city of Chiapas, where he was handed over to the Mexican authorities. After crossing the border, Jorge was taken to Mexico City, marking the successful completion of the extradition process and the delivery of justice. Jorge appeared in court to face charges for his alleged crimes. A reporter managed to ask him a few questions, but Jorge responded with a complete denial of any wrongdoing, claiming he was unaware of the charges against him. This was despite being taken to court on October 26th for a preventive measure, specifically for the murder of Campera. During the trial, the prosecution presented strong evidence of Jorge's involvement in the crime. The investigation revealed that Jorge had brutally beaten the victim with an unknown object before strangling her to death. The prosecutor classified the crime as a feminicide, made worse by the fact that Jorge had a romantic relationship with the victim. The prosecutor also pointed out that Jorge had a prior conviction for theft and was possibly involved in the death of another ex-girlfriend, Jan. Despite the overwhelming evidence and arguments against Jorge, his lawyer proposed an alternative explanation that Jorge was mentally unstable and needed a psychological evaluation. This move came as the community awaited justice, expecting a suitable punishment for the perpetrator. After thoroughly examining the evidence, witness testimonies, and arguments, the judge turned his attention to Jorge and his lawyer. He asked how long it would take to complete the psychological evaluation. Following a consultation, Jorge's lawyer agreed that Jorge would attend all subsequent court hearings. Upon reviewing all materials and considering both sides, the judge rendered a verdict. There was sufficient evidence from the prosecutor to hold Jorge accountable for his crimes. The court ordered the investigation to continue and gave a 4-month deadline to gather new evidence. Meanwhile, Jorge was taken into custody and held at a pretrial detention center. Despite Jorge's arrest and guilty verdict, the Campera and Jan families faced a lengthy and challenging process ahead. In August 2019, an oral hearing was held in Jorge's case. His lawyer asked the court to disregard the videos that showed Jorge entering and leaving Campera's house on the day she was murdered. They claimed that these videos were incomplete, taken from a 30-hour recording at the crime scene, and could not be used to prove Jorge's guilt. The videos had been given to the victim's family by a neighbor who recorded them. The family then passed them on to the police, who brought only partial recordings to court. The police had lost the original disc. Jorge's lawyer alleged that the Mexico City prosecutor's office had concealed this information, which only came to light on the day of the hearing. The defense lawyer argued that the materials used to obtain the arrest warrant were unlawful. Specifically, the lawyer claimed that a key video was given to the Campera family rather than the judicial authorities, and therefore could not be used as evidence. Despite this, the supervisory judge rejected the defense's petition after considering the prosecution's arguments and the testimony of Campera's friends and neighbors. Additionally, the court considered 2 witness statements, but did not accept them as evidence. The case proceeded, and Jorge was allowed to appeal the decision and present the same arguments again. Meanwhile, the young family was dealing with their own separate case. A ban on violence against women was established in Mexico City, thanks in part to advocacy from several groups, including the Mexican Institute of Human Rights and Democracy and the Center for Justice. This new decree was influenced by multiple high-profile crimes, including the murder of Yen. As a result, her case was forwarded to a Mexico City court for trial. Nearly 7 years after Yang's murder, charges were formally brought against her suspected killer, Jorge, in May 2021. Shortly thereafter, a judge ordered his arrest for his role in her murder. Despite these developments, Jorge's defense team was able to significantly slow down the investigation and prosecution. 9 years after Yang's death, Jorge Humberto Martinez Cortez was sentenced to 52 years and 6 months in prison in November 2023 for taking Yang's life. While the Yang family has finally received justice, Campera's family still faces a lengthy process. A trial had been scheduled for April 2022 at the detention center where Jorge was being held. Activists were resolute that this time the perpetrator would not evade accountability. Jorge's lawyers have successfully delayed the hearing once again, which was set to take place on January 29, 2024. Over 50 witnesses were expected to be called to testify, but for now, there is no update on the status of the hearing in the media. Jorge's family remains hopeful that he will eventually be held accountable for his actions. While nothing can bring Campera back, they seek justice and want to ensure that her death does not go unpunished. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.